Greetings, everyone. Thank you for checking out our Long-Term Parking November podcast. This month, we had so many great questions for the podcast that we decided to split this month's recording into two separate parts to shorten the listening time. With that being said, here is part one of our November Long-Term Parking podcast. Greetings, everyone. This is the next long-term parking where we are here as educator extraordinaires to answer your questions. And so I am Christopher McClung, curriculum developer, and with me is
Deidre Puentes, peer coach leader.
James Hattar, community recruiter.
Hisham Diab, program manager.
All right. So our first question, what different resources are out there besides the obvious and normal resources? So we did a couple months ago, we did a webinar that's available on the CTE Teach YouTube page that is all about tech tools for teaching. And in that webinar, there's obviously a lot of different tech tools like Kahoot and whatnot, but there's even a section about a lot of Google stuff that most people don't know about. And those are some interesting apps as well. And I know there's a book out there, I believe the title is called Things to Do with Your Students During Sixth Period on a Friday, and it's basically all about student engagement and other things available for that. So anybody have anything else that they want to add?
There are some resources on the CRIROP website, especially if you're looking for something technology related. It also gives you links to CTE Teach as well. And there's also the IT approved apps and softwares if that's something you're interested in engaging your students.
Additionally, I would add that there are books on instructional strategies that apply to just general pedagogy. In addition, the industry-specific resources would be great to utilize that are not, obvious, but specific to industry.
So our next question is, do we have to give a final?
If you have an articulated class in which the contract states that the student needs to have a B or better and the 70% on the final, then yes, you do.
Mm-hmm.
However, there are differences to that depending on what the contract articulation agreement says. So if the articulation agreement says that there is a specific agreed upon final, then that is the final that you would be required to give. If it does not state that and it just says you must give a final, then that would be up to the teacher's discretion to determine what that final would be. So if it's a culminating project or something else, that would be up to the teacher's discretion.
Right. And sometimes the final, can be a project. I know when I taught, we were media, and so what we would do is do a showcase every semester, at the end of every semester, and that showcase was the final, was creating a project for that showcase.
When I taught pharmacy classes here on the campus, part of the final was a student had to write a prescription, they had to transcribe it, and then in the lab, as part of the final, they had to prepare a sterile needle and syringe and then inject it into an IV bag. So this way that those hands-on activities was at the end project was their final.
Exactly. Even, whether it's called a final, it's really mostly a summative type assessment that brings everything together, whether it's a project, a practicum, or even a multiple choice final exam.
Sure.
Those are all summative assessments, and they can only inform our practice.
Yeah. Very good. What are some fun classroom activities for end of semester?
I like to do interesting icebreakers, and it was a little fun activity in which I had the students line up outside of the classroom, and then I called one student in which I was videotaping that student, and we had almost like a little mini mock interview, and then I asked that student on camera to bring the next person in from the outside to come in, and they had to repeat everything that was said between us to this other student with no explanation. And then that student had to bring the other student who was outside and try to have the same conversation until at the very end, the conversation that originally started was something completely silly and way off track.
It's kind of like the telephone game.
Exactly. And so what happens is that I videotaped this whole thing, and then we played the video for all the students, and they got to see how the miscommunication went way off base. And it's funny, but at the same time they learn a lesson about how things can be misconstrued and how when you're dealing with customer service or even say social media, how things can get way out of base and how do you fix that situation when it comes to communication skills. So it was a fun thing to do and the students enjoyed it, and something that I mentioned to teachers if they have the time to do it, something completely different and the students don't know what to expect.
Right.
So as he was talking about that, the class I taught was career planning and management. So I would always try to save like the communication or the leadership portion of my curriculum to either the beginning or the end of the semester, because the beginning it lets them get to know each other. At the end of the semester it allows them to maybe work on some of the skills they've been developing over the semester. So there's a lot of books out there that have a lot of different activities, how to do team building, as to increase esteem, different activities you can get students to say positive things to each other. Like, and it's really harder than you think to say, go around the room, say something nice about your neighbor, quick, and then they're just kind of like, ugh, it's hard for them. So, so just even little activities like that, it could be something you think of on the spur of the moment. I visited one of the classrooms, and the teacher was talking about how to present yourself in an interview. And as he was talking about it, at the end, I thought, oh, I'm watching some of the students kind of lean over and their body language isn't that positive. So I told him, I said, I think it would have been perfect for you to say, you should have just stopped right there and said, stop, look at your neighbor and tell me what you think of their body language. I said, because right then they would have realized like, oh, this says a lot about what's going on in their head or what their attitude is about the environment. So, I mean, there's different things you can do.
Yeah. Yeah. And then at the end, when you can always show projects. So like we would look at everybody's animations. We would check out everybody's games from like all the classes, and I got to spend a period of just doing that with them. And then the best is to always make a rap video that you can show.
Oh, rap videos, yes. I would also even suggest utilizing your students as a resource. I was in our auto shop just recently, and for that little last week right before finals, the students in that class wanted to have a DMV type focus where they can focus on the written test, the driving, and so that was beneficial for them. And so I would say reach out to your students to find those
like, even though it's not specifically related to class, you got to learn how to drive properly. That's a skill everybody's going to need eventually. So,
right.
I mean,
and what a great opportunity it is.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Awesome. Next question. Can we write a grant to get more technology in the classroom, or is there someone who does that?
Depends on where you work. Some places have full-time grant writers. Other places don't. At CRIROP, we don't have someone specifically that does that. Melissa has taken over that. And I believe we've contracted with somebody to help with the grants that are coming up. And I'm not sure exactly what is in those as far as technology goes. That would be something that is decided as they're writing the grant, like what the focus of the grant is. But you can always look online to see if like Target, Walmart offer any like educator grants. There's even this one that says fund teachers or something. It's kind of like a GoFundMe page for teachers where you can kind of raise your own money and get donations that way.
Yeah.
And I don't know if everybody likes it or not, but it's an idea.
Yeah. And then I would also encourage you to look into seeing how grants are written and write your own. I've heard of teachers who get grants just for their own special projects and stuff.
And when it comes to grants, it's truly a team effort. So it's not an individual endeavor. So we will work as a team to make that happen. But yes, absolutely.
Awesome. Next question. What do you do when the kids have a funky attitude and refuse to learn?
Who's taking that one?
Hisham.
I think it really comes down to the engagement aspect. You have to know your students, and the more you are able to know about your students, the better you're going to be able to customize your lessons to meet and engage them into your lessons. So I would say really get to know your students. And once you know your students, this situation can easily be resolved.
Yeah.
I was just thinking that sometimes they'll come in, like, okay, so we did a tip meeting last night, and I should have done this, and I didn't, because I felt like someone wasn't in the best of mood for whatever reason. I found that when I was in the classroom, even if I had done it last night, maybe it would have been to my and their benefit, is just go over and ask the student, is everything okay today?
That's right.
Because,
That's right.
like, I don't think they even realize that you can see it outwardly, like how they're feeling.
Right.
And if you acknowledge that you notice something's off, then they might be more apt to engage with you, because if they think you don't care or you don't see it,
Right.
then they don't really want to engage. So
Right.
that might be something that would help.
Yeah, and going back to knowing your students, if I think if it's just like that day, then there might be something that's bothering them that day.
Right.
Parents lost a job, or they're just, they didn't get anything to eat at lunch, just some whatever basic need that might be. If it's an ongoing thing that seems every day, maybe they're just not understanding the class and they feel defeated because they just don't understand the content and they're not brave enough to ask for help. So.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So next question, how do you get students to stop asking questions when the answers are written on the board?
Well, you don't. However, if, because when I first read the question, it's kind of like, how do you get students to stop asking questions? Well, obviously you want them to ask questions as long as they're well planned or well thought out or have a purpose. So if they're purposeful questions, then I would say don't stop them. However, if it's just a question to get the teacher off topic and to go on a little bird walk, I don't want to keep calling it boardwalk. Then I can see why that would be annoying. However, if it's written on the board, that's a benefit to you because you can just point at it and look at the student.
Right.
And then they will get the message like, oh, it's right there.
Right.
So that's my only suggestion for that, is that don't repeat it for them continually. If they're asking it over and over again, you're going to point at it so that they will learn where they can find that information.
Right.
And even respond to the question with another question, like, where can you find that information?
Right.
Is it written on the board?
Yeah, where is it posted? Yeah.
What do you think the answer to that question would be?
Might be.
Awesome. Is it possible to get YouTube access for the students? This obviously sounds like it's very campus and specific.
Every campus has access to YouTube, and other campuses don't. I think it's a district thing.
Right.
That's not a CRIROP issue.
Yeah.
So, and that would just depend on your district, because I know like Redlands in particular, they don't have access where some of the other districts do. So it just depends on how they have their firewall set up.
Yeah.
So, however, I don't know if this is a question about the question. So if the teacher puts a link to a YouTube video in Google Classroom that's offered through the Redlands, that school's provider, whatever, network, does that mean it's still going to be blocked?
It will be blocked, but there is now a process for teachers to request it to be unblocked. So that way, if they want to insert it into a Google Classroom, there's a process for that now.
Do that. Okay, well, that's good to know.
Awesome.
Or if you can find another site that would have that video, because the majority of the YouTube videos are not original content made for YouTube.
Right.
They're videos from other sources that someone recorded and posted up themselves. So I'm sure if you know what the title of the video is in YouTube, you can do a search and see if there's an alternate site that would be authorized through the district that you can use to see the video that way.
Mm-hmm. All right. So I think that's all the questions we have. Hopefully we answered all your questions the best we could. This was our very long overnight term parking.
Over term. Long. Yes, long term.
And we will answer some more the next time we have a round of questions.
But that won't be until January.
And that won't be until January because we are taking December off for the holidays, but we will be back in January.
All right.
And thank you all for listening. We hope you have a great day and a great teaching.
May the force be with you.